I'm really embarrassed, I must confess. That's too much. Anyway, thank you. And it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you. And I'll try not to bore you too much with my talk. So I hope it will be too stressful, too tiring. I will discuss, as Shakina said, a topic that is maybe not so commonly treated, not commonly dealt with, that is the relation between folk linguistics and language teaching education. I don't know how many of you are familiar with folk linguistics, and so I think I will first of all try to introduce this topic by giving a definition of folk linguistics, and then I will try to set the relations that exist between, or that may exist between, folk linguistics and language teaching education. Then I will describe the results of a survey, of an investigation that I started now, well, 11 years ago in Australia, and then I carried on in Italy, and then it ended in Argentina. And then we will analyze the details. I will discuss the results of this investigation, of this survey. And in the final part of my talk, I will establish the relation. I will explain the relation that and the advantages that may derive from applying the methodologies of folk linguistics to language teaching, especially when it's focused on sociolinguistic aspects. And then at last, I will draw some conclusion. So let's start first of all with a quotation. This is from a text I edited many years ago with my mentor, I would say. And this definition, this quotation will be like a fil rouge that I will try to keep in mind all through my presentation. The best language textbook is the one that is written, this was from a survey that we conducted in that year, is the one that is written in the learner's mind at the end of a course. So this is kind of, I would say, a background, a back fil rouge that I would like to follow all through my talk today. So first of all, let's see what folk linguistics is about. Let us give a definition of what folk linguistics is. The most common definition of what folk linguistics is that it is a branch of linguistics that scientifically studies language from the speaker's perspective. This definition dates back to Preston, a colleague of mine, who is basically the founder of folk linguistics. What I tried to do, well, to give you some more examples of what folk linguistics deals with, it studies what lay people who are not experts in linguistics, think about other varieties of the language that they speak, other dialects, both from the macro point of view and the micro point of view. That is to say, folk linguistics investigates opinions and attitudes that people have towards their own variety of the language that they speak, or other varieties of the language, but also about specific aspects of the language that they speak, or other languages that they may know, like phonetics, certain pronunciations, the use of certain words or instead of others, and things like that. But the important thing about folk linguistics is that it is not the opinions of experts, of linguists that are taken into account, but the opinions of lay people, lay persons, people who are not, specialists in linguistics. Somebody may ask, what's the point of doing this? Well, the point is that on the basis of these judgments, you make forecasts what will happen in the future. Because if somebody has, for example, a positive attitude towards a certain way of speaking, a certain pronunciation, some kind of some parts of the vocabulary and things like that, maybe one day they will become the new standard or the new norm. So it's very important to have an idea of what people really think. And this is also very useful when you do anthropological linguistics, because it explains, it helps understanding at least, what the relations between different social groups might be. What I've tried to do in the last 10 years is apply the principles and methods of investigation of folk linguistics to an area that is originally out of its reach, that is educational linguistics. That is, I've tried to apply these methodologies and these principles to language teaching, basically. And in order to do this, I've tried to establish a kind of stable relation between folk linguistics and language teaching education. So in the relation between the two, several focus areas can be pinpointed that can be described according to whether they regard teachers, which are further subdivided into language teachers and teachers of other subjects, and students. So to make it more specific, to make it clearer, teachers, as I said, can be divided into two main groups. Teachers of languages, not just foreign languages, but even native languages, and teachers of non-linguistic subjects. The points you can focus on, the aspects you can focus on when you deal with the teachers of languages are attitudes that they may have towards linguistic correctness and what it means to know a language, because on this a lot of things will depend. For example, if they will teach grammar as their main point, or if they will concentrate on communication. This is just to give you an example of what may derive from applying, folk linguistics to the analysis of attitudes that teachers of foreign languages and languages as a whole have towards what a language is. Attitudes towards the concept of language variation and variability in relation to models to offer to learners. This is also a key point, especially when you consider language from a sociolinguistic point of view. And then opinions on how a language should be taught, which is also very relevant, very important. And then when we talk about teachers of non-linguistic subjects, you may investigate, for example, attitudes and opinions towards bilingual students whose first language is not commonly considered prestigious. This is currently a very important topic in Italy because we've got a lot of students who were either born in Italy or abroad, but whose first language, whose native language was not Italian. But it makes a big difference whether your first language is Albanian or English, in terms of attitudes that people may have towards that language. We all know that from a neurolinguistic point of view, that doesn't make any difference. But in terms of, image and of attitudes that people will have towards you, that shouldn't, but actually does make a big difference. So you may also investigate, study and learn what it means to study a foreign language. Is it the same thing or is it different from studying and learning any other subject? And then opinions about their role in relation to the process of acquisition of the local language by foreign students. So these are the two main groups that we may investigate when we talk about teachers and their opinions towards language teaching and learning. Then when we talk about students, we may investigate opinions on what a language is and what it means to know it. If you've been, if you've studied languages all your life, working basically on grammar, your expectations are basically to receive the same kind of teaching when you approach the study of a new language. So that's very important too. And then opinions on how a language should be taught and on which of its structural aspects, grammar, pronunciation, formal correctness, cultural dimension, etc., should receive more attention, and on what methodologies should be adopted and employed in teaching the language, of course. And then studying and learning a foreign language is the same as or different from studying and learning any other subject. This is very interesting because I've got students at university who do not study foreign languages as their main subject. And there's a big difference in the way they study languages and in the way, students of foreign languages as the main area deal with studying languages. Most of the times I find students of other subjects studying foreign languages as if they were other subjects altogether. So they will, for example, take a couple of weeks before the exam and start studying the language. That will never lead to good results, of course, as we all know. But this has a strong impact, of course, the kind of attitude they've got towards studying and learning a language has a strong impact on their possibility to succeed. And what are the analogies and the differences between learning a native language and a foreign or a second language? As for their native language, what are the correct or the up-to-date or trendy structures that should be taught when you teach the language to foreigners? And last but not least, opinions on the foreign language and culture that they are learning. Is it nice, ugly? Is it useful? Is it useless? And things like that. What I will focus on tonight is this specific aspect. So I will try to present the results of actually 3 separate but strongly related to one another investigations that, as I said before, I started carrying out in 2010, and then I completed in 2015 in different countries, in different continents, as you will see in a minute. So the aim of this investigation was to compare the attitude that native speakers of 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Italian, have towards what should be included and what, on the contrary, should instead be left out when their languages are taught to foreigners. In particular, the intention was to verify whether there are differences in the opinions of speakers of 2 extremely polycentric languages like English and Spanish, and another language which is not so widely spoken as Italian. So I tried to take these 3 languages into account because of their similarities as far as English and Spanish are concerned, and of the differences that there are between these 2 and Italian. The methodology, 3 relatively different but comparable questionnaires, which also included questions not analyzed here, of course, because the questionnaire, as you will see, was extremely complex with different areas touched upon, but respectively in English, Spanish, and Italian, were designed and administered to university students of foreign languages and or linguistics at universities in the 3 countries, Australia, Argentina, and Italy. Some general observations about the informants. For all the 3 languages, informants were aged between 20 and 25. They were mainly women, as is often the case with students of foreign languages. They seem to be particularly popular among women, girls, definitely more than among men. They knew at least another language, 55% of them, and very often 2 or more, 36 of them, at least at the B1 level. I don't know if you're familiar with the levels of the Common European Framework of Languages. B1 means intermediate, basically, I would say, apart from the native languages. They all have had some traveling experiences abroad. And they all came from the periphery of the areas where their native languages are used, that is far from where the standards are set. Australia is, of course, in the periphery of the English-speaking world, geographically, but also culturally, and in terms of impact that Australian English has on English when it is taught as a foreign language. The same may be said for Argentina, of course, because at least in Europe, when Spanish is taught, the reference variety is definitely Peninsular Spanish, that is the kind of Spanish spoken in Spain. And even in South America, the reference variety tends to be Mexican rather than, the southernmost variety spoken there, that is Argentina. And then in Italy, the area, at least not the variety maybe, but the area that I investigated is the Northeast, which is definitely not the most popular one, the most popular in terms of standard setting for features that you can, for example, hear on the TV or generally recognized in the media. All informants as you can clearly understand, were language aware. They were all students of languages, of foreign languages. Most of them knew 2 or even more languages. They had traveling experiences abroad. Some of them had actually traveled a lot. So they were all extremely language aware. General observations about the languages under investigation. English is the 3rd most widely spoken native language with about 350 million speakers. It's the 1st official language in about 100 countries in all 5 continents. And it's the 1st most widely studied foreign language. So just to introduce, I'm sure you all these things, but just to introduce a little the 3 languages. Spanish, it's the 2nd most widely spoken native language with about 400 million speakers. Numbers are increasing as compared to English, whose number of native speakers is actually decreasing. It's the official language in more than 30 countries, mainly in South America, but also in Europe, Africa, and in Asia. Statistics, which are, to be taken very carefully, say that Spanish is the 3rd most widely taught and studied foreign language. I don't trust these statistics because Italian should be the 4th or the 5th most widely studied foreign language worldwide. I don't trust these statistics because it is very difficult to really know how many people study a foreign language. There is no database telling us how many people study a language. So if it is something that we can take for granted that English is definitely the 1st most widely studied language, I'm not sure about, statistics about the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and so on and so forth. Italian, it's the 23rd most widely spoken native language with about 65 million speakers, and it is spoken only in 3 or 5 countries, depending on what you call a country, because it's also spoken in the Republic of San Marino, which is a very small independent state in the heart of Italy, and then in the Vatican City and in Switzerland. So it's definitely less widely spoken than the other 2 languages we are investigating. These are the places where the investigation were conducted, where I collected my data, University of Sydney and the University of Melbourne, where I was a visiting professor in 2010. Argentina, where I was a visiting professor in 2015. And in particular, this is very interesting because I said that Spanish, the kind of Spanish that I investigated, or the kind of the area of where Spanish is spoken that I investigated, was in the periphery of the Spanish-speaking world. But it was even more so because I went to the northwest of the country, which is the periphery of the periphery, if you pass me this expression, because it's the northwest where definitely the kind of Spanish that is spoken is not the same as in Buenos Aires, which is the area where the standard of Argentinian Spanish is actually set. And this is Italy, so the northeast of the country. It's the University of the Università degli Studi di Udine and the university, my own university, that's the Università degli Studi di Padua. Okay, here are the results. This is the structure of the questionnaire that I used for English. It was divided into 4 parts. There was part 1 with general information about the informants, so age, sex, languages that they spoke, experiences abroad and things like that. Then there was a second part that was devoted to world English, so their opinions about world English, English as a world language, things like, which varieties of the language are considered, or do you consider to be more prestigious, and things like that. And then opinions about their own variety, opinions and attitudes towards their own variety, towards Australian English. And the last part of the questionnaire was devoted to English as a foreign language. And this is the one we are going to discuss tonight. Here are the results. As you can see, I'm starting from question number 13 of the questionnaire because the previous 12 questions were in the other 3 parts that made it up. So which of the following aspects do you consider the most important when you hear a non-native speaker of English? And as you can see, there was a certain balance between fluency and appropriateness, grammar correctness, pronunciation and intonation, and lexical appropriateness, and use of idioms were instead definitely less important. What is your attitude towards some non-native speakers' deviation? I didn't want to call them mistakes, because if you use the word mistakes, you are already giving an opinion. Whereas if you use the term speakers' deviation, you're not saying that they are right or wrong. It's just another way of saying the same thing. We can put it like that. From native models of English. And as you can see, the answer that received more likes, I should probably say using a Facebook expression, was that what really matters is that we understand each other. So that's very, very, very significant, very, very important. Argentine, Spanish, once again, the structure of the questionnaire, as you can see, this is in Spanish because the questionnaires were administered every time in the language of the informants. So Spanish for the Spanish speakers, English for the English speakers, and Italian for the Italian speakers. The structure of the questionnaire in this case was exactly the same as the one for Australians. So general information, the two sides where, part 2 and part 3 were placed in a different order, but the contents were basically the same. Even the questions were basically the same, only translated into the other language. Argentinian Spanish, Spanish as a world language, or as it is spoken worldwide, and then Spanish as it is taught as a foreign language. Answers here. Which of the following aspects you consider the most important? And as you can see here, the aspect that prevailed was fluency and appropriateness, where appropriateness means being sociolinguistically correct, to make it more explicit. The other question, what is your attitude towards some non-native speakers' deviation from native models of Spanish? And as you can see, as you can see, there's basically the same kind of same amount of answers for each of the three possible answers there. Another question here that wasn't present in the English questionnaire. In your opinion, which of the following varieties should be taken as a model when teaching Spanish as a foreign language? This is very interesting because, as you can see, Peninsular Spanish still has a very important, that is, the Spanish spoken in Spain. It still has a very, big amount of supporters, we may say, but Argentine Spanish is of course also very, very popular. Moving on to Italian. The structure of the questionnaire here was a bit different from the previous two, but still there was a part devoted to Italian as it is taught when it is taught as a foreign or as a second language, and that was part 3 in particular. And these are the questions and the relative answers. Which of the following aspects do you consider the most important when you hear a non-native speaker of Italian? And as you can see, there are some similarities. I will show you the answers comparatively at the end of this session. But as you can already understand here, fluency and appropriateness still prevail, as was the case with the Argentinians. And lexical appropriateness seems to be, for some reason, relevant to Italians. Once again, as was the case with the Australians, the answer about what really matters is that there's some kind of mutual intelligibility, that we can understand each other. I tried to figure out an explanation for this, Australia and Italy have a lot of immigrants. Both countries have been for a long time now, you know, the final destinations of a lot of immigration from many countries around the world. Whereas the area where I conducted my investigation in Argentina is relatively less attractive to foreigners. And when foreigners go there, they are mainly Spanish speakers. They come from other countries where Spanish is the native language. So there's probably a less open-minded attitude towards, you know, correctness as is normally understood. The next question, in your opinion, which of the following varieties should be taken as a model when teaching English as a foreign language? And as you can see here, there's something very, very interesting that I will explain later on in the next part of this talk. Elements of the linguistic repertoire was the choice that most of my informants made. Italy is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the sociolinguistic structure of Italy. It's an extremely complex country where many languages are spoken. And what makes it even more complicated is that these languages, most of these languages at least, are not officially recognized. They are called dialects, just to give you an idea, but they're not dialects of Italian. They're actually independent languages, all deriving from Latin, but with a different history, with a different literature, with so many differences from Italian that most of the times they are not mutually intelligible. Just to give you an example, in some cases there might be more differences between Sicilian and Standard Italian than there are between, say, Spanish and Italian or French and Italian. So mutual intelligibility is not always at hand. I think that there is this kind of, we may call it awareness that Italian itself is perhaps not enough, and that there should be some kind of availability to include other elements that make up the sociolinguistic repertoire of Italy today. These are the answers compared, put all together on the same drafts. And as you can see, you know, there are some differences here that we will analyze later on. But I just want to, I will not comment on these. I will just show you the graphs, the comparative graphs here. What is your attitude towards some non-native speakers? And as you can see here, there are also differences and analogies as well, which I will try to comment on later on. Okay, some teaching and educational implications of the results of this investigation. Argentine Spanish speakers consider fluency and sociolinguistic appropriateness as the most important aspect, whereas Italians attach a lot of importance to lexical appropriateness too, which is not present in the, or not so relevant in the Australian questionnaires. No neutral variety of Spanish or even Argentine Spanish seems to exist, and this is also very interesting. South American Spanish should have more space when teaching Spanish as a foreign language. Number matters. You know, Spain may be the cradle of Spanish, but the countries, the area of the world in which Spanish is spoken more widely is definitely South America. And this is perhaps something that has become particularly popular with South American speakers of the language. For all the three groups, when teaching as a second language, the reference variety should be the one of the country where one finds him or herself. This is very interesting because I'm sure that if we had asked this question 20 years ago or even more, the answer would have been different. no similar investigations, as far as I know at least, were conducted in the past. But from what we understand in scientific literature, standards have always, universal or more widely accepted standard have always prevailed when teaching in each of these three languages to foreigners. Whereas here, what we find is that there is a relatively new attitude towards what it means to teach these languages and what reference varieties should be taken when teaching them. If compared to English as a world language, Spanish still belongs to its native speakers. And this is something very important when you compare Spanish and English as world languages. This is something that I didn't tell you about, but perhaps some of you will already know. The relation between native and non-native speakers of English is currently 1 to 5. For every native speaker of the language, there are 5 non-native speakers. So this has, of course, a strong impact on what it means to know the language and on the language itself in the end. Whereas Spanish is still spoken by more native speakers than by non-native speakers. And of course, this indicates that the language basically still belongs to its native speakers. Although the Argentine Spanish speakers are more open to innovations introduced by non-natives than, other speakers of the language. Phonetics is a key point to Australian English speakers for some reason. And mutual intelligibility, regardless of other aspects, is essential to Australian English and Italian speakers. And Italians are prone to thinking that, learners of the language should be exposed to as many varieties that make up the linguistic repertoire as possible. And this is something that I didn't find in the Australian English speakers and in the Spanish speakers. Some of the results just illustrated are rarely present in language classes and or in teaching materials. And regardless of existing differences in terms of language attitudes in the 3 groups here analyzed, native speakers' opinions are important to understand what they expect a non-native speaker to do sociolinguistically, pragmatically, and grammatically with their language. So this is very, very important, I think. And we shall see at the end of this talk what impact this has on language planning, for example. Now, let us try to establish, to make some kind of very clear relation between folk linguistics and a sociolinguistic oriented approach to foreign language teaching. There are 3 premises we need to make. No language is entirely uniform, and only very rarely are linguistic repertoires made up of exclusively one language, dialect, or variety. This applies, I think, to 99% of countries worldwide. Maybe one exception is New Zealand, but other countries everywhere in the world tend to be multilingual. Maybe not officially multilingual, but definitely what people do in their daily lives is use more languages at the same time, maybe not at the very same time, but during their lives and during every day. Far from being a weakness or an obstacle to communication, such multi-layered and multifaceted complexity represents a richness that native speakers can and do have recourse to broaden their possibility of expressing social shades of meanings, even in relation to the very same semantic content. We all know about this. We're all familiar with this. We all know that we've got, many different ways to express the same concept or to say the same thing, not just in terms of vocabulary, but also sometimes of, grammatical choices we make, of accurateness in terms of pronunciation, for example, and things like that. The universe of linguistic hues, this universe of linguistic hues is hardly accessible to foreign students of such languages, who most of the times must content themselves with a mainly superficial comprehension of the sociolinguistic barrier. So instead of being a means, a tool to be more effective, variation may become a hurdle, an obstacle, a barrier that is very often hard to cross, to go beyond for foreign speakers of these of all languages, I would say, not just of the three that I've taken into account in my investigation here. So the key word is, of course, variation, which takes place which goes along with variability, which is a physiological feature of all living languages. It's only dead languages that don't change anymore. But as long as a language is actually spoken, it is, as long as it is alive, it tends to change, to vary in all possible directions, I would say. I tried to elaborate a theory about what it means to teach a language with a sociolinguistic oriented approach, and in order to do this, I singled out three levels of awareness. The first one, I called it conscious. Sociolinguistic consciousness is here meant as the ability to reflect on one's mother tongue, which can only improve through the comparison with a foreign language. I think this is an experience we've all had in our lives. When we started studying a foreign language and we started understanding more of the structure of that language, we became more aware of the features of our own language. So sociolinguistic consciousness mainly relates to one's mother tongue, but it can improve through the comparison with a foreign language. This is my point here. Such consciousness refers not only to the structures of the language, but also to their roles as tools for social communication. To put it more scientifically, we may say that sociolinguistic consciousness deals with both the micro sociolinguistic side of the language and the macro sociolinguistic side of it. The next step is sociolinguistic consciousness, which is to be meant as a kind of meta-reflection that should lead to an aware level of désossure parole, thus making it more manageable. You basically understand that variation is there for a purpose. Okay, you may not be able to manage that. You may not be able to use it completely, especially when we talk about a foreign language, but at least you are aware of the fact that that variation, that variability has a specific purpose. And the last and most important level to be reached is that of sociolinguistic competence. So eventually, theoretical consciousness should be turned into a functional competence, that is a procedural ability not only to interpret the social value of language choices made by other speakers, native or not, but also to make those choices independently and adequately and appropriately, that is sociolinguistic appropriateness, to different topics, contexts, co-texts, interlocutors, and the objectives of the communicative event. I'm basically referring, I'm sure you all know this, to Delheim's model speaking, which lies, at the foundation of sociolinguistics as we mean it today. So the variation, potentiality, implication for foreign language teaching that derives from all this is that variability, which is expressed through variation, provides the speaker with the possibility to make aware choices among different forms, which turns out into an increase in his or her expressive and communicative potential. So the more variability and the more control you have on variation, the more choices you have at your disposal. And of course, the more choices you have, the more communicative powerful you become. And this is what I decided to call the variation potentiality implication. This leads to, developing a different attitude towards what it means to teach a language. We've all been, through the experience of studying a language, a foreign language, having a very clear idea of what the reference model was. And it was basically the standard variety of that language that we were taught. But I think if we take sociolinguistics into account, then we will have to broaden this idea to something completely different. Something that I had decided to call a teaching variety, where the term doesn't refer to a simplified variety. So we don't have to confuse a teaching variety with teacher talk, which is a simplified variety of the language that you're actually teaching. A teaching variety is a variety that moves the focus from the standard variety of the language that you're teaching to the linguistic repertoire that that language belongs to. And I will try to make this clearer in a minute. In order to do this, we need to set a class based on a variable model. And this is what I called a variable model class, VMC. We must be aware, we're all aware, however, that not the whole linguistic repertoire of any language could ever be expected to be taught. No language could ever be taught as a whole. It's obvious that we can't do that when we expand the teaching model to aspects, not the whole of the linguistic repertoire, of course. And so what? So what's the way out of this impasse? My idea was to borrow two terms and two concepts, not just the terms, from computer sciences. And these two terms are utility and usability. This definition here refers to usability in relation to computer sciences. Usability is a quality attribute that assesses how easy user interfaces are to use. The word usability also refers to methods for improving ease of use during the design process. Now, Nielsen goes on explaining that usability is defined by 5 quality components. Now, what I will ask you to do here is read each of these, learnability, efficiency, memorability, errors, and satisfaction, and try to apply these concepts not to computer sciences, but to languages, and you will see that they will fit perfectly. So each of these components, which were first singled out in relation to computer sciences, can easily be applied to language teaching and to language as a whole. So learnability, how easy is it for users to accomplish basic tasks the first time they encounter the design? In other words, and in relation to language, how easy is it to learn something about that language, no matter what it is, pronunciation, grammar, morphology, syntax, and so on and so forth. Efficiency, how efficient and how effective are you when you use the language? And how easy is it to remember what you've learned? And of course, in all this process, errors play an essential, a fundamental part, as we all know. But the most important of these 5 components is definitely satisfaction. The more satisfied you are with what you are learning, with what you've learned, the more you are motivated to go on learning. And that's what lies at the basis of language learning, I think. So on the basis of this, we may, kind of suggest a definition of sociolinguistic usability as the degree of correspondence that there is between the learner's actual needs, features, and interests, and the answers to them that the language course he or she is attending can and does provide. And this is, in my opinion, extremely important, not just in terms of what you learn, but in terms of being motivated to go on learning. I understand that this is still a little abstract, so I tried to find three, basic fundamental criteria to build the teaching variety I referred to before. So the three criteria that should be used when building this teaching variety, in my opinion, are that teaching what is useful before what is not useful is the starting point. So there are things in a language that are less useful than others, and things that are, of course, more important. So utility will be determined by analyzing the learner's present and or future needs, motivations and aspirations, not just in relation to language learning, and may, as a consequence, change a lot from one student or group of students to another. So there's no standard here that we can find. Needs and the idea of usefulness depends on what the learner's needs really are. The second point is that teaching what is more widespread, both in terms of grammar and vocabulary and of actual sociolinguistic use, should precede what is less or so, not even used anymore at all. When we teach foreign languages, we sometimes teach things that native speakers will never use in their, maybe in the whole of their lives, but they're still there because they are in grammar books, because they are considered important for some reason, but they may not be useful at all. So, how frequent a certain structure occurs is also very important as a criterion to decide what should be taught and what maybe should be taught later or not taught at all. This is again extremely variable, of course, because it depends on the type of language to be taught and the specific purpose and context of the course. Just to give you, a very practical example, if you teach English for medical doctors, you will have to teach things that will not be necessary to somebody who is studying English to become an engineer, not just in terms of vocabulary, but in terms of, structures and expressions that may not be useful to somebody who is studying engineering or is studying linguistics. And from this, it entices, from these two first criteria, it entices that it will not always be possible to teach what is easier before what is not, which is more complicated. But the advantages deriving from learning something that is perceived as more useful will be rewarding, thus triggering off new motivation to carry on working and learning. So these are the three criteria, I think, that should be taken as a guide, as a guideline when building the teaching variety to be taught. The idea behind all this is that students should be exposed to as many varieties as possible, right from the lowest levels of proficiency, not from the right from the very start, I would say, according to their needs, features, and interests, and according to the native speaker's real language use and usage. So once again, the important thing is the opinions, and this is the link between the investigation that I illustrated before and what I'm saying right now, between folk linguistics and language teaching education. If you know what native speakers of a language expect non-native speakers to do, you can provide non-native speakers with what will make the native speakers happy. We may put it like that if you want, but this happiness doesn't mean that they are happy because they hear what they want to hear, but because they will be able to communicate more effectively. And I've decided to call this approach bespoke language teaching, a tailored kind of language teaching approach, so to speak. Conclusions. Folk linguistics and bespoke language teaching approach have a very strong relation, as I hope I've been able to explain here. In order to make language courses more effective and thus more satisfactory for both learners and teachers, opinions and attitudes elicited by applying folk linguistic principles and methodologies to language teaching education can be highly rewarding. Such outcomes should be taken into account by all stakeholders involved in the language teaching education process at all levels. And that means when writing teaching materials, books, handbooks, courses, planning a language course and choosing the syllabus to be adopted, basically what should be taught and what may be left out, and teaching a foreign and of course when teaching the language. So you see there are three different types of stakeholders here that may benefit from applying folk linguistic principles and methodologies to language teaching education. Those who write books, those who plan language courses, and of course teachers themselves. I want to conclude this presentation by, I started it, you may remember, with a quotation, and I want to conclude this with another quotation. This time it's from Shakespeare, The Tempest, and this is Caliban saying, "You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse. The plague rid you for learning me your language." So this is, I think, something very important. You should put your learners in the position to curse you if they think that you haven't done a good job. Thank you very much indeed.